Welcome to my channel, C.S. Lewis Spirit. In today's video, we step into one of the hardest and most mysterious parts of faith, the silence of God. Have you ever prayed with all your heart, begged for an answer, and yet heaven seems so far away? That moment when you expect the sky to open but instead you're met with stillness. It's a silence that feels heavy, almost unbearable, and it leaves you asking, why isn't God answering me? This story is about those moments, the times when it seems like heaven has shut its doors and the only sound is your own voice echoing in the dark. There was once a man, deeply devoted, who spent every day praying, fasting, and believing that God would guide him through the storms of life. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was faithful. When tragedy struck his family, he ran to God with tears in his eyes, pleading for help. But instead of answers, he was met with silence. Night after night, he looked up at the stars, whispering prayers that felt like they were falling back down to the ground. He wondered if God had forgotten him. This silence isn't just his story. It's a story that belongs to all of us at some point in our lives. When sickness lingers, when relationships break, when dreams shatter, and when life doesn't go the way we planned, the silence of God becomes one of the deepest trials of faith. It is in this silence that questions rise louder than ever. Does God still love me? Is he listening? Has heaven turned away? But here's where the mystery deepens. Silence is not absence. What feels like abandonment might actually be preparation. The quiet seasons of God often hide a power we cannot see in the moment. In the Bible, many of the greatest men and women of faith experienced God's silence. Think of Job, who sat in ashes asking why. Think of David, who cried out in the Psalms, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Think of Jesus himself in Gethsemane, sweating drops of blood as his prayers were met with the stillness of night. Silence has always been a part of the journey. The man in our story continued to wrestle with his faith. Each morning, he would wake up and hope that today would be different, that today he would feel God's hand guiding him. But each morning, the silence remained. His friends told him he must have sinned, his enemies mocked him, and even his own heart began to doubt. He started to wonder if God's silence was actually his judgment. But what if the silence wasn't punishment? What if it was the soil in which something greater was growing? As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the weight of the unanswered prayers became almost too heavy to bear. He faced the choice that we all face in moments like these: give up on God, or hold on even when nothing makes sense. And just when he thought he couldn't take another day of silence, something happened that changed the direction of his life forever. But before we get to that moment, we need to sit with the silence, to understand its weight, its mystery, and its hidden power. Because the silence of God is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of something we cannot yet see. The silence began to press on him like a weight that never lifted. Each prayer felt heavier than the last, each night longer and darker. He looked around and saw others receiving what he longed for. Friends who prayed once and saw doors open, neighbors who spoke of miracles, strangers who testified that God had answered them quickly. And yet, for him, there was nothing but waiting. The unanswered prayers became a shadow that followed him everywhere, whispering in his ear that maybe God had turned away. But this silence wasn't just about him. His family felt it too. His wife carried the burden of unanswered questions, wondering why their children's tears seemed ignored by heaven. His friends tried to comfort him, but their words only deepened the wound. He could not ignore it. The silence had driven him to the very edge, and now the question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Would he walk away from God, or would he step into the unknown, trusting the silence itself? Just when he thought the silence had reached its peak, another storm rose without warning. It wasn't just his unanswered prayers now. It was the sudden collapse of everything he thought was secure. His closest friend, the one who had stood beside him through so many trials, betrayed his trust. Words that were once full of encouragement turned into whispers of doubt behind his back. People began to talk, spreading rumors that his suffering was his own fault, that perhaps God's silence was punishment rather than testing. The sting of betrayal cut deeper than the silence itself, leaving him more isolated than ever. The weight of the conflict grew unbearable. He was already struggling to hold on, already questioning if faith meant clinging to hope in the dark. But now, even those he trusted most seemed to turn against him. His heart grew heavy with questions. If God was silent, and if people had abandoned him, then who was left to stand at his side? The silence of God, once only a personal struggle, had now become a public burden. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him, and whispers filled the air. And then came the second twist, something that struck even deeper. His child, innocent and full of life, fell gravely ill. The doctors shook their heads, hope faded, and once again he found himself on his knees, begging heaven for even the smallest sign of mercy. But once again, silence. The silence of God echoed louder than the cries of his child, louder than the beating of his own heart. This was not just about him anymore. It was about the life of someone he loved more than himself. The tension inside him grew like fire. He wanted to believe that God's silence had meaning, that there was hidden power in waiting. But how could silence be holy when the life of his child hung in the balance? Every unanswered prayer tore at his soul. Every passing moment felt like a test he could no longer endure. And as the night stretched on, he reached the breaking point. He stood between faith and despair, silence and surrender, and the weight of the choice before him threatened to crush everything he had ever believed. And as the night stretched on, he reached the breaking point. He stood between faith and despair, silence and surrender, and the weight of the choice before him threatened to crush everything he had ever believed.